It was just an old mirror, a plain thing, framed in tarnished brass standing against the wall in the attic. Dust had gathered on the glass, a thin veil hiding the truth behind it. Rachel had always avoided that part of the house, the attic, where shadows seemed to linger a bit too long. But today she was feeling brave. Her parents had just moved out, and it was up to her to clean up the house before it was sold. She had started in the attic. Boxes of forgotten things. Old clothes, yellowing photographs, and half-finished craft projects. But something had caught her eye, a gleam from the corner of the room, the mirror, leaning against the far wall. It seemed so out of place, an old relic from another time. Curious, she approached, wiping the dust away with her sleeve. Her reflection appeared, faint at first, but soon sharp and clear. It was then she noticed something strange. The reflection wasn't quite right. She looked like herself, but her movements were delayed. It wasn't obvious at first, just a fraction of a second, but enough to unsettle her. She waved her hand in front of the mirror, and her reflection mimicked her, but with a slight pause. Why hadn't I noticed that before? Rachel stepped closer, feeling her heart rate increase. Something felt wrong. Her reflection was wrong. It wasn't mimicking her anymore. It was studying her. The eyes, her eyes in the mirror didn't look the same. They were darker, colder, empty. Suddenly the reflection smiled, but Rachel didn't. Her stomach turned, and she staggered back, gasping. The smile on her reflection stretched wider. Her own face had turned into a grimace of horror. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The reflection, however, didn't seem to care about her panic. It watched her. "Hello?" Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "Is someone in here?" The reflection smiled wider. Number It didn't answer with words, but it didn't need to. Rachel could hear the faint whisper in her head, like a voice just out of reach, cold and foreign. It was laughing. "You should have never come up here." The hair on her neck stood up as the air in the attic seemed to chill. The reflection's eyes turned black, its smile twisting into something grotesque. Rachel wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Why couldn't she move? The reflection's hands raised slowly. In the mirror, her reflection began to move on its own, pushing against the glass, as though trying to break through. Her own hands, still paralyzed at her sides, trembled in response, as if mirroring the reflection's own desperate movements. The moment she tried to turn away, the reflection followed. It pressed against the glass, growing more violent with each passing second. The air seemed to hum with energy, a static charge building in the room. And then, in a heartbeat, the reflection's hand shot forward, slamming against the glass. Rachel screamed and stumbled back. But it wasn't over. The glass cracked. A faint, almost imperceptible crack appeared, spreading from the center outward. The reflection's eyes gleamed with something far more sinister now. They were no longer hers. It was something else, something old and hungry. Rachel's breath quickened. She turned to run, but she felt something, someone, grabbing her. Cold fingers wrapped around her wrist, pulling her back. She gasped, spinning around, but there was no one there. Her own reflection grinned back at her from the shattered mirror. And then, in one final horrifying moment, the reflection stepped out from the frame, its fingers curling around the edges of the glass. Rachel screamed, but the sound that came out of her mouth was not hers. It was a laughter, low, dark, and twisted, and the reflection smiled.